If you're not armed, you're not free. You're only as free as your government is temporarily allowing you to be. Let me ask you a question, and it's a really important one. If, let's say, the Democrats and the liberals who are suffering from Trump derangement syndrome, let's say that they're correct. If tomorrow President Trump orders the United States military to abolish the First Amendment, if he tells the United States Supreme Court it's time for you to go home, if he tells Congress, the United States Senate, it's time for you guys to shut up and sit down, I'm going to do whatever I want to do. If he starts wielding the military, and let's suppose that they don't want to get court-martialed, so they do as they're ordered, what is going to stop the President of the United States from being a tyrant? Well, the scary part about that question is basically the same thing has happened many, many times all throughout human history. Look at the most horrible things that governments have ever done to their own people. Genocide, holocausts, all terrible, terrible things. Chattel slavery, disgusting, egregious human rights abuses. You know what one thing they all share in common is? Those governments first disarmed their people. You know why? It's because it's a lot easier to load someone into a boxcart when they don't have a gun to shoot you with. The answer to that question is if you're not armed, you'll do nothing. You might stand in the street like that guy in Tiananmen Square, and it's very brave. It's a bold show of defiance against tyranny. Yes, absolutely. You might end up in a history book, but you still die. You still get run over and crushed by a tank. If right now, today, Donald Trump fulfilled the dreams and fantasies of those on the left and he decided he was actually going to be a legitimate tyrant dictator, if we, the American people, were not armed, there is basically nothing we could do to stop him. We could go out in the street, we could protest, we could harp and moan about it, but unless he just had a sudden change of heart and a come-to-Jesus moment, this hypothetical rogue Donald Trump would be basically unstoppable. You know, however, what would actually happen if somebody like President Trump snapped? I don't think Trump would ever do this, but anybody, let's say it was Joe Biden, if they just snapped and they decided that they were going to throw away the entire Constitution, you know what would happen? The gun owners of America would head to Washington, D.C., and they would fulfill the promise of the Declaration of Independence, which says that if any government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right and the duty of the people to either alter that government or to abolish it. Our founding fathers knew darn good and well what it looks like to abolish a tyrannical government. They had just done it in the form of a revolutionary war. In fact, the actual declaration was written and sent in 1776, but the shooting started a year prior in 1775 at the battles of Lexington and Concord. Many people don't know about this. The public school system does a poor job of teaching this. The reason that the Crown had targeted Lexington and Concord, those two specific locations, is because they were munitions depots. You know, back in the day, they had gunpowder, so you only wanted to store so much in your house, otherwise it would get quite dangerous, fire hazard, that sort of a thing. So they would have munitions depots where the communities would gather and they would store a lot of their gunpowder in a specific designated area. A lot of their munitions were there. The Crown knew tensions were rising in the New World. The colonies had a lot of freedom and they weren't ready to just give that up. And so King George decided that that was where they would hit first. The Redcoats decided that the best way to enslave the American people was to disarm the American people. We are a nation born out of rebellion against tyranny. We are a nation born out of the Second Amendment and the necessity, the right of the people to keep and bear arms that shall not be infringed. If you are not armed, you are not free. Every single time there's another shooting, we, the American people, have to suffer through another garbage lecture by a bunch of people who don't know the first thing about firearms. They don't care about our nation's history, and probably they're the very tyrannical dictators who want to enslave us as they jump up and down and they chant, "It's the guns, it's the guns, it's the guns." No, it's not the guns. Every day I sit here with a loaded .357 sitting next to me. That gun will never do anything that I don't make it do. Inanimate objects, believe it or not, are inanimate objects. They cannot do anything. They're not responsible for anything. If we have a problem in this nation, which we obviously do, if we have a problem, well, for one, it's left-wing violence right now. But it's a mental health issue, and you don't fix issues like that by taking it out on innocent people who have done nothing wrong. And the notion that we would go toward so-called common sense gun restrictions, what exactly do you mean by common sense gun restrictions. This coming from the very people who couldn't tell you the first thing about a firearm. There is no such thing as common sense gun restrictions. You ask 100 people, you'll get 100 different answers, many of them giving you answers that are literally impossible or are already one of the, 20,000 some odd firearm restrictions that our country currently has in place, every single one of which being a direct violation of the text of the Constitution. You know, the answer is never to go after innocent, law-abiding citizens. But you might ask yourself, okay, Victor, it is kind of, like, you might think this, you might think it is kind of common sense to say that you have to store a firearm in a particular way. Or you might say it's kind of common sense to prohibit certain kinds of firearms, certain calibers, certain classifications of firearms. We have things on the book right now like the NFA. And we have the Firearm Owner Protection Act that Ronald Reagan signed back in the 80s, which gutted the Second Amendment. That's a terrible, terrible thing. And if the government gets to have their foot in the door in that manner, it is a legitimate slippery slope. You ever heard of the book When You Give a Mouse a Cookie? He's going to want more. He's going to want milk. He's going to want this. He's going to want that. When you allow tyrants to be the ones who get to say who gets to exercise their rights and how, those cease to be rights. If you, the American citizen, if you have to go take a special class to exercise your First Amendment freedom of speech, you do not have freedom of speech. If the government has to give you a special stamp of approval to exercise your First Amendment right, it's not a right, it's a privilege. The exact same thing would apply when it comes to the Second Amendment. If you have to have the government give you a special stamp of approval or have some sort of a class or all of the... You're not free. You're begging at the altar of government for the permission to exercise your rights. That's not how free men live. The entire purpose of the Second Amendment is to serve as the final check and balance between a free people and their government. If all else fails, we have the Second Amendment. That is the entire reason that we have it. It is the only thing that actually keeps the government in line. And somebody might say, well, there's European countries where they don't have firearms, but they haven't been overtaken by a tyrannical government just yet. Don't be so sure about that, by the way. You have people in the United Kingdom being arrested for so-called grossly offensive speech. I wouldn't exactly go as far as to call that a free state in my personal opinion, but going back to the original question of this video, if the government of that country decided that they were going to become tyrannical overnight and bring back the regime of Adolf Hitler or something like that, what would the people of that country be able to do about it? The answer is essentially nothing. Maybe beg for the Americans to come help them. That's the most realistic thing that could possibly happen if a European nation had its government start to just willy-nilly arrest people for their free speech. Seem a little bit familiar? Even Canada, our neighbors to the north, are experiencing quite similar situations because their people don't have a check and balance upon their government. You know, the Second Amendment says a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, I have content going in pretty great detail as to what all of those words mean. There's quite the debate among people who are looking for ways to discredit the Second Amendment. They'll say, well, well-regulated. Ironically, look up what well-regulated meant in 1791, the year of the ratification of the Bill of Rights, including the Second Amendment. It meant more like well-armed and well-trained. So a well-trained people, which actually is more of a pro-Second Amendment stance. And then, you know, the idea that we are the militia. Yeah, well, Founding Father George Mason asked the question, who is the militia? He then answered his own question, and he says it's we the people. We are the militia. We are the ones who are the final determining factor of a free state. And so the Second Amendment makes very clear that anything that would infringe upon our right to own firearms is a violation of the United States Constitution. We have that for a reason. And for anybody who thinks that's antiquated, for anybody who thinks, oh, well, that's ancient history, people change, places change, names change, human nature does not change. The issues that faced humanity 100 years ago, 400 years ago, 600 years ago are the very same issues that plague human nature today. If governments became tyrannical 100 years ago, they can and will become absolutely tyrannical 100 years from now. Reject every single one of these insane proposals that you see where they try to come in and say, just give us a foot in the door. Would you do it for the First Amendment? Would you allow the government to come in and say, well, you have to have a permit for that? You have to have a special license to speak freely. You have to go to a special class to speak freely. You can only say certain things. You can only say certain words. If it's offensive, if it might do this, if it might do that. No, you would never do that. So why would you do it with the Second Amendment? Do not accept this insanity. Anyways, that's all I have for you. Hope you enjoyed it. Till next time, keep me in your prayers, keep your country in your prayers. God bless.